Section 143 is pretty straightforward. It just deals with its retroactivity, and all those repeals in the previous section are retroactive. They apply to any offense committed, case pending, conviction entered, anything before the date of enactment of this act. So if you've been charged with a drug crime and you can drag out your trial date until after the enactment of this, then that, and it was a federal charge, then that federal crime would be wiped off the books and you wouldn't have to worry about it. Yeah, so Section 143 is just about retroactivity, and I think that concludes my testimony on that. Section 144 is also very short. Says banking is not prohibited. You might remember from the hearing on civil asset forfeiture, the armored car company that got stopped 5 times in the last year, never got issued a ticket, no arrests made. They just had $1 million in cash confiscated from their cars. And again, the reason they were moving all that cash was because of the banking laws. That because the marijuana is illegal on the federal level, banks that have federal charters are very leery of accepting money that is, related to unlawful activity, because there are big penalties, potential 20-year jail sentences, prison sentences. So let's fix that problem, and again, bring the underground trade into the legal market, and emphasize that banking is not prohibited. There's actually legislation that's floating on Congress that would fix this for marijuana, but Congress doesn't seem to be getting anything done. And that concludes my testimony for Section 144. Section 145, imposing a sales tax. In short, there's a 12% sales tax on retail sales for any states that opt into legalizing drugs. Again, drug use is not harmless, and if we're going to legalize it, we're going to tax it and regulate it. And so it sets a 12% retail tax. Prescription drugs are exempt. I should say this applies only to recreational drugs, so that were formerly under the Controlled Substances Act. So if your controlled substance is a prescription drug, there's no tax on that. It's just recreational drugs. Of that 12% retail sales tax, 50% of it, the money collected, goes into the U.S. Treasury, and the other half gets divided up to 25% goes to for treatment services, 15% goes to services to communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs, and the last 10% goes for legal aid in restoring justice for the drug war. That's pretty much it. We'll talk more about some of those details in the next section. So Mixed Chair, that concludes my testimony for Section 145, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a quick question, and maybe you'd be getting into this in the next section, but why 12%?
We looked at what the other tax rates of other of the jurisdictions that have legalized marijuana around the country. 12%'s sort of in the middle. You might know there was a piece of legislation that would have legalized marijuana on the federal level, and it had a 25% retail tax. We came in at half of that. And where the 12% tax rate came from, that's just what we came up with.
Oh, and I received a similar question from Larry in New York. Where did the 12% tax rate come from, which you just went over, and will it create an underground market?
Will it create an underground market? I mean, certainly there will be a non-zero amount of drugs that are sold outside of the legal market. Same way that there's a non-zero amount of alcohol that's sold outside of the the normal chain of distribution. Is the question is a 12% tax rate enough that people would prefer to buy heroin on the streets and risk a fentanyl overdose rather than buying a product that's tested and regulated? And I say the word safe, but you know what I mean when we're talking about heroin, but something that that they know what they're getting. Is 12% enough that they'd be willing to risk their lives? I don't think it is. I mean, I think a majority of people prefer to be law-abiding adults as long as the laws, especially when the laws make sense. And so if you have an opportunity to be a law-abiding adult and buy your recreational drugs from a regulated store, the vast majority of people are going to do that. When I was in the New Hampshire legislature, we debated. We were the first legislative chamber to pass a bill legalizing marijuana back in 2013, 2014. And Colorado had just legalized it. And so I had some friends that told me they were going on a road trip from New Hampshire. And, I asked them where they were going. And I said, Colorado. Like, I knew they smoked marijuana in New Hampshire, but they were willing to drive halfway across the country to do it legally, to be law-abiding adults. So will there be an underground market? More than zero, but most people like to follow the laws.
I have another question from Tony in California. If cannabis is part of this, the cannabis industry would fight against it. They have battled against legalization multiple times in California and additional programs that would further cut into their profits, such as an expansion of the industry. I guess it's not really a question, but it is what he submitted.
Again, this isn't about protecting the profits of any industry. So yeah, they're welcome to battle against it and say, it's better that there be a federal drug war if they think that's best for them, but it's not. Yeah, so that I understand that industries who might lose out on profits under this piece of legislation will not be happy with it, but it's not about protecting profits.